Weekly Outlook, General Election, SMCR lands and Fed rate decision Monday 9 December. Senior managers and certification regime begins for solo-regulated firms. Schroder European Real Estate Investment Trust final results Tuesday 10 December. UK manufacturing and construction output and industrial production data. Chinese inflation figures. Ashtead first half results. SMCR Bell Investment Director Russ Mould said, shares in Ashtead have soared over the past year, despite concerns over a US and global economic slowdown, helped perhaps by hopes that US interest rate cuts and a trade deal between Washington and Beijing will provide fresh impetus in 2020. Wednesday 11 December. US Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC, meetingCanaccord. Genuity Wealth Management head of MPs and passive Jordan Sriharan said the Fed has been very clear that the 3 rate cuts we have seen this year are all that investors should expect, describing the recent short burst of cuts as an insurance policy. The Fed is not expected to lower rates at this week's meeting, but a huge amount of attention will be focused on messaging in the post-meeting press conference. The Fed has used a lot of spare ammunition in pulling the market this far up in 2019, illustrated by the swift rebound in equity markets following last year's turmoil. It will be a very difficult balancing act to keep investors happy going into 2020. U.S. inflation. CPI. Sriharan said inflation in the U.S. has disappointed expectations for the better part of the last decade and there's no obvious sign of this changing soon. Despite this, the immediate picture is relatively unclear. The Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, PCE, is a measure of inflation utilized by the Federal Reserve, which has been on or below 2% in nearly 90% of observations since 2012 when this target was adopted. On the other hand, the Cleveland Fed's inflation measure recently moved above 3%. The more widely followed US CPI measure has been in the 1.5% to 2% corridor for much of 2019. The September reading was 1.8% and surveys suggest that October's release will hit 2%. Anything higher might push government bond prices materially lower after their spectacular run in 2019. British American Tobacco Trading Statement Thursday 12 December. UK general election. Mould noted the opinion polls are giving the Conservatives a fairly consistent lead and in theory, one big enough to give them a majority in Parliament. On the basis of the results of the 2015 and 2017 polls, which threw up coalition governments, it might not pay to take too much for granted, but the calm reaction of the UK's financial markets so far suggests that they are indeed pricing in a victory for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, rather than another coalition or a triumph for Labour's Jeremy Corbyn. Mould said history suggests the FTSE All-Share has performed, on average, better under the Conser. For more on this story, visit the news article link.